Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar titled Fundraising Metrics for Success with our very special guest, Jenny Mitchell from Chavender. My name is Lara Wong, and I am a senior account executive here at Belmar Consulting. We're a Salesforce.org partner specializing in partnering with non-for-profit organizations on their Salesforce journey. I'm personally excited about our webinar today, as what we're going to discuss has frequently been relevant to me in my 20-year nonprofit career, and very, very relevant to any nonprofit leader who is scratching their head about how they might better serve their constituents, achieve internal efficiencies, and really amp up their fundraising. We're in for a treat as our guest helps nonprofits achieve many of the outcomes I've just described. But before I introduce Jenny, there's a couple of things I just want to highlight. This session is meant to be interactive, and we want to hear from you throughout the webinar. Ask questions by posting in the Zoom chat, which you'll find in the Zoom control panel. For the best viewing experience, I recommend viewing the webinar in speaker view. You can access the speaker view in the top right corner of your Zoom window. We will do our best to answer as many questions during our Q&A session, which will be towards the end of the webinar. At the end, we have a participant raffle prize, which will be drawn towards the end of the webinar and announced at the end. But there is a catch. You need to be on the webinar when we announce your name, and otherwise you can't win. And last but not least, we are going to mute the line. So please remain on mute throughout the webinar for the benefit of everyone who's participating. Finally, we will be sending out a link post-session, but the session will also be recorded and available on our YouTube channel following today's event. Now that I've covered all the housekeeping notes, I am very, very excited to welcome Jenny Mitchell, Chief Visionary Officer of Chavender. Jenny and I have been moving around in similar circles for many years, and I've seen and heard about the impact that her perspective brings to the clients she gets to partner with. Jenny, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Lara. Anything for you.
Amazing. How about we start at the beginning? For those joining us today, could you just give us a bit of a background on who you are and how you got to where you are today?
Well, I mean, so where shall I start? How about I start with, I've always been a curious kid, okay? And because I'm a curious kid, I tend to move from subject to subject, and I get interested in things and I move on. So my first role was actually a classical musician. I have a doctorate in piano performance. I spent almost 30 years of my life studying the minutiae of piano and piano performance and all the dedication, discipline, and commitment that comes with being a musician. And I actually think that is the root of my creative juices and my passion for not-for-profit, because I fell into raising money for pianos because I went as a teacher to the Brooklyn Conservatory of Music and I said, hey guys, we got to raise money for these pianos. These pianos are terrible in the concert hall. And they said, yep, well, we're going to need to fundraise. And I said, okay, so how do we do that? And basically I was hooked from then on. And I will fast forward one more little bit to say that my work with not-for-profits, my work as a professional fundraiser has also led me to coaching, Lara. So I'm passionate executive coach. It's a program I just recently completed, and I've been adding to my toolkit, trying to understand why people don't fundraise, why people don't collect the data, Lara, right? Sometimes it's technical. We're going to talk about culture change, and I can't wait to have that discussion with you. So that's me.
Amazing. Thank you. And just to quickly too, because I know this is always an interesting thing. I know you started out in fundraising for pianos, but what made you make the leap from doing musicianing, and I guess that's not necessarily a proper verb, but being a professional musician and then switching to starting Chavender and becoming a professional fundraiser?
It's a great question. So like many women, I sort of woke up one day and had finished all of the school I could do because I loved being in school and I loved learning. And I looked around me and I thought, well, what could I do that was, this is so embarrassing, daytime hours. So I was a new mom, and I knew I could write and I knew I had a connection with people. So the conscious decision for me was, when I was teaching piano, it was all evenings and weekends, and my husband had a day job. And so we were completely polar opposites. And when I first fell into that first fundraising course, and I'll never forget this, it was at New York, it was at NYU. I was living in New York at the time, and I fell into this introduction to fundraising course. And I remember, Lara, feeling like these goosebumps. And those of you that are listening, that first time you realize that fundraising is about bringing people together, fundraising is about making the world better than it is today. And the only way to do that is by bringing all these ideas and concepts together to work for a larger purpose. And that has stuck with me from day one. And so that was like 2000 and, well, my youngest is, so that's 2004. And I really haven't looked back since. If anything, I think I've become really, really passionate. I do work in the arts, interestingly enough, but I actually work across all sectors, which I find interesting.
That's really beautiful. I love your backstory. In creating Chavender, is there a specific target that you're looking to work with? Who do you serve?
Great question. And thank you for that. So I am passionate about people that want to change. Let me start there. So I am really, I believe in what keeps me in this sector is the power of the people, right? So in other words, we have some amazing resources in our sector, and I think that they're completely undervalued. You know, in your world, you're talking to data people, you're talking to CEOs that are, you know, trying to figure out how to transition old antiquated systems. In my world, I'm talking to executive directors and CEOs who are trying to transition, dare I say, old and antiquated boards of directors. Did I say that out loud? As well as programming that maybe needs a refresh, maybe programming that needs, you know, some new life and some new energy and some volunteers. So my profile tends to be my senior leadership suite. I also have some mid-level programs as well. I have a Chavender talent development program, which is for those mid-level fundraisers. My passion is the people, because I think even if we could get 5, 7, 10% more out of those people in our sector, just imagine the kind of impact we could have, Lara.
Yeah, I mean, even just in your intro, when you're talking about what attracted you not for profit, I mean, I remember the first time I even heard about the industry, and I was just like, I want to do that. I don't know what it is, but I want to go work with nonprofits and try and make the world a better place. So it's really interesting how people come into this space. Looking at the nonprofit space in general, and just, you know, I know you have conversations with so many different people. What are some of the different trends that you see happening today?
So first one, pace of change, right? The pace of change has accelerated so much. We are being forced, some of us kicking and screaming, let's be honest, to modernize, to adapt. And I think it's really exciting. I think, you know, I always say there's nothing more unstoppable than a truckload of hell yes. Am I allowed to say that? I hope so. And, you know, whether it's a data transformation project, whether it's a new capital campaign, whether it's, you know, completely revamped online program, all right? If you were doing things in person and now you're online, I find that really exciting. But it's very uncomfortable for some people. So I think that we're going to have to get comfortable with the pace of change. On the same note around trends, I do think digital transformation, I wish we could come up with a new word, but it's here to stay, right? So not just a transition to online, but a transition to a new format. I think we'll be in hybrid mode for a while. I don't think we'll lose the online. You know, my tennis club, the average age, well, I won't, the average age of our members is over 65, and we ran a virtual Zoom meeting with no glitches, Lara. Like, that just tells you the kind of transition that the world is seeing. And donors are happy to be meeting you via Zoom for meetings. You know, you no longer have to get all those cars parked in the hospital parking lot. Everybody come in, get them through security, get them into the ER, Lara. Like, those are the, you know, those donor tours, that was our bread and butter. I do think those will exist, but now we have opportunities that really abound, and I'm excited to see what charities are kind of grabbing those things and going with it, because I think you have to accept that some of them are going to fall flat too. I think that's part of the game, is trying things and see what works for your organization.
I definitely think this year has shaken all of us to a place where we're so used to being unsettled, that we're just more maybe open or realizing that if we don't change, if we don't take those opportunities or try new things, like we're dead in the water, right? So I know, like, when we were thinking about things, about some of the evolutions of nonprofits and even just the formats, you had some interesting comments on just some of the smaller organizations and the smaller personal foundations. What's your approach on that?
Are you talking about foundation disbursements, do you think, Lara, or yeah,
Yeah,
around?
this foundation disbursements. Yes, exactly.
So there's a couple things. I don't know if your listeners are following along very publicly in the Globe and Mail about the very public advocacy fight that's going on to encourage foundations to disperse more of their assets. This is tied into the idea that, like just easy math, if you have $1 million by law, I think you're required to disperse 4% of that every year. So you make 6%, you can disperse 4 and your asset grows by 2. And that's about all the math you're going to hear from me today, Lara, just to be clear. But there's a real push, just like the other, we're trying to get money into the economy, into the average Joe's hands, but also trying to get money into charities' hands. So this idea of increasing our disbursement levels for foundations, private foundations, is going to be ongoing. The reason I bring it up is it speaks to the changing role of charities. And I didn't mention social enterprise in our trends discussion, but I probably should have. I look at my teenagers at my house. They choose what they buy, what they consume based on the social footprint of that company. And that is the modern consumer that's coming up. My dad doesn't do that. He chooses the cheapest one, right? Or the one that he recognizes. And so I think all of this is tied into, what is the changing role of a charity? Is it okay for charities to make money? I think that's a really interesting conversation that is happening in real time, like I said, on the Globe and Mail business section. Should these foundations be sitting on a whole pile of money? Should they be dispersing it? For some of us, we're thinking about investing in a digital transformation that can actually save them piles of money. So I've seen it with my own eyes.
Mhm.
But those initial outlays are expensive sometimes, and that ties into money mindset for the charitable sector. Ooh, I've just got a whole bunch of places. It'll be fun to see where you take it next, Lara.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like in our line of work with digital transformation, and we've definitely been seeing over the last year, people are speeding up a lot of projects that they might have been looking at maybe 3 to 4 years down the road. And I'm curious, like from what I've seen, there's been almost a reallocation in funding where foundations and where funders are more interested and maybe more supportive of funding things like digital transformation because they recognize the impact that'll have in the organization and that whole necessity to be able to continue serving your constituents in a very different way. And like all these things, which, from the technology side, we've been looking at for years, hoping they would come to nonprofit. It's like, it suddenly just got thrust upon us. And it's great for our business, but it's also really exciting to see the impact of that from a nonprofit and seeing how they're changing and evolving. Where do you see and then going back to the fact that these are very expensive, in many cases, expensive projects to embark on, how do you see the shift in the mindset going from a leadership perspective?
Oh yeah, so it's happening. Like it gets me really excited, right? I can see it with my own eyes happening. Whether it's a hospital talking about a massive health integration strategy, right? And being able to bring those conversations to donors. Sometimes I'm in front of donors talking about how we can integrate your what are they called? Your X-rays and your CAT scans, and you can go to 3 different local hospitals and you can access all those things at the same time. I mean, that's super powerful data and information. Yes, it has a big price tag, but that being said, the impact also has a fantastic impact and a patient experience. So I do see leaders shifting to think about more long-term, trying to
Mhm.
amortize things over a couple of years. And I think also finally we've gotten out of this stupid conversation about overhead, right? You would never, here's a catchphrase for anybody that's listening, right? You would never start a business and expect to spend 5% of your whatever your annual is and make 35%, 40%, right? And if you invested 10%, 15% on the expense side, you would expect to have 40, 50% on the revenue side. And yet the overhead conversation in charity is basically don't spend any new money, but expand your revenue on the other side. And I share this because many of us are sitting with board members who are business people. And I often find when I frame the conversation about expenses, which I prefer to call investments,
Mhm.
rather than asking what it costs right now, asking what the impact on the revenue side will be is a completely different conversation. So return on investment versus the cost, because yes, it's going to hit your bottom line that year. And that scarcity mindset is starting to open up because the fear is real, Lara. Because there will be mom and pop shops that are left behind. There will be mom and pop shops who don't innovate, who closed down their fundraising last year, 2019 or 2020, when the pandemic hit, and said, we'll just ride this out. And they will be behind the curve, period.
Mhm. So how do you see them shifting then if they want to survive?
Yeah. So can't stick your head in the sand, right? You just can't. You've got to get up. You got to dust yourself off. You got to try some things. You've got to get new blood. I mean, if you're a mom and pop shop listening and you're struggling, who can you invite into the conversation to make some of this happen? Who are resources in your circle? And I start often with volunteers just because that's my world, Lara. But also they often have resources within their companies that can reach out, or bringing in some of your team members, or if you're a national organization, bringing in your chapters for across the board discussion. I'm a big believer that the information is usually out there. It's just hidden in some silo, right? Because there's some silo out there that has it, that knows it, but hasn't shared it with others. So I really think those sort of strategic discussions, I have a friend that calls them, oh, what does he call it? Ideation conversations. Like, what are the ideas that will position us differently in the marketplace? And yes, make no mistake about it, even if you're a charity, even if you know you're a charity and you don't want to think of yourself as a business, you still have a value proposition. You still have a value and an impact that you provide to the community. And you must be checking in with that to make sure you're aligned, because they won't support you. If you're going to go off and do something that they don't think, let's just use geriatric care or dementia care, right? If they don't support that project, if they don't think that dementia care right now, I'm in Ottawa is a priority, the money will not flow, even though you think it's a great idea or the 9 people sitting around your board are. So that idea of collaborative, that idea of feedback seeking, to adapt and to try some things. Last thing I'll say on this is, and I'm very passionate about this, is crawl, walk, run. There's huge amounts of fear. We're going to talk about change management, about trying something new, right? There's reputations on the line, especially when it's volunteers. It's almost easier as a staff member than it is as a volunteer. So trying a pilot, I love the word pilot. Could we try this with our data? Could we try cleaning it this way? What if we screened it? What if we, being creative that way, how could our outcomes change with that crawl approach? And then taking that and learning that to the walk approach, and then learning that to the run approach, which is obviously the place we want to get to. But managing change will be part of the secret sauce for success, I think, for mom and pop shops.
That's great. Um, so looking at moving into sort of, you've touched a little bit on the leadership level and how they're starting to shift and reprioritize their focus. And we've looked at 2020 versus 2021. Understanding that nobody, given the state of the last 2 years and nobody could plan for any of this, what is the sentiment for next year and beyond? Is anybody thinking anything or looking at a crystal ball and saying, yes, this is the way we go?
Could we do this, Lara? Could we get folks on the call to go on the chat and let's put it this way. How optimistic are you for 2022? Can you folks in the chat put in a 5 for like super optimistic? 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm just curious to see what our members think.
Ooh, I got a 100.
Holy moly. Okay, I see some 3s. Look at this.
Oh, well, the 100 was a bit of an outlier. This time we've got a 4, a 5, a 5, a 4, 5, 3, 5. Oh, 2, 3, 4, 4, 4, 4, 3, 3.5, 4. So I think people are generally fairly optimistic. Maybe it's that attitude, like, we've gotten this far, we could just keep going and we've got this, but it's looking pretty confident.
I'm impressed with you guys. I'm going to come work at your shops. Couple thoughts. So this is what I'm hearing. I'm hearing, yes, we've got through this. We can do anything. I think that's what we've got on this call today. If I'm hearing objections, I'm hearing it's sorry for the quote, air quotes. It's easy when how do I put this? It's easy when everybody's on the mind of the pandemic and people are being generous. What happens when we get off the radar, right? People go back to life. And my response has been, and this goes across all the pandemic, you know, if you had a strong constituent group, if you had donors before the pandemic, if you had a mission that was relevant, you still have a mission that was relevant. You still have donors after the pandemic. If you were floundering, like I talked about some of those mom and pop shops, if you were struggling to connect in meaningful ways, if you didn't have enough touch points with the people that fund you, if you weren't being creative with your grant applications and whatnot, you still have those problems afterwards. I am optimistic, you know, if it's shooken us up, if it's shaken us up at all, you know, your comment about overhead, I use the word overhead, you talked about investment. I think people are ready to have those conversations. And that gets me really excited because that gets into a what's possible conversation. And that's where I love to play as a professional fundraiser. I mean, basically, we're just opportunity bringers. That's all we really do, right? We bring opportunities to people. We invite people to learn about something we can't control whether they actually want to sign up and learn more, right? But you know, you were a fundraiser for years. We're opportunity bringers. We need to let people know of what's out there, and it's their call whether they want to self-select and learn more. So I guess I'm by definition and by DNA optimistic, Lara. It's part of the job, I think.
Absolutely. So this session, you know, we build it as fundraising metrics for success. So maybe we should start hitting up on some of the metrics pieces. So, you know, just starting with yourself, what are some of the personal and professional metrics that you like to track for yourself?
Okay, did you guys hear that? She said personal and professional, like gold star, first of all, because I think there's professional metrics that we are absolutely responsible to our bosses for. But as an executive coach, as a, you know, as a personal growth nut, let's call me that, what are my personal metrics that I'm following? You know, things like how many workouts did I get this week? You know, did I show up for that 7:15 exercise class? How many times did I step on the tennis court? How many books did I read? So I just love that you mentioned that, and maybe I'll just let that float here as you're listening to this session. Professionally, I think there's a couple. You know, I run a business. I'm always pretty transparent about that. So if I don't reach out and connect with people, the dollars and the business doesn't come in. I can't control whether they hire me, right? But I can control how I engage in the places that I engage. So those are some of the things I think about, and I'm pretty strict about my own personal metrics. Of course, I track money, and all of you on this call probably know, probably painfully well, what you raised last year, right? And maybe another fun one. You know, don't put the number in, but how many of you know exactly, I want a yes or no in the chat, exactly how much money you raised last year at your organization? Yeah, right? Me, yeah, yes, right?
Me.
We always know that one, right, guys? So here's the ones that I would love for you to also start thinking about, right? Sometimes I feel like that number is like a big calling card on your back that sort of walks around, right? You know what you're defined by your number. And in some worlds, you know, we're only as good as our last gift. I've certainly heard that, Lara, and it's something I can't stand. But let's break this down a little bit more. So you've got that number. We usually know what our revenue is, but what other metrics are they usually capturing? Depends on the size of your shop. I'm really trying to make this discussion like scalable. If you're small, you probably know how many donors are in each tranche, right? $1,000 and under, 1,000 to 5,000, 5 to whatever your number is, 25 or whatever. You'd be surprised how many people actually share that with their boards of directors or their leaders. And it's always really funny because I often get called in, you know, come and hire a fundraising consultant. We want to run $1 million campaign. Why $1 million? I don't know. It sounds like a lot of money, right? And then you look at the pyramid. This is where the data comes in to support the strategy. You look at the pyramid, and for those of you that might be a new term, you know, a pyramid is the gift pyramid. At the bottom, there's many, many annuals, and then you move up to the fewer and fewer at the larger gifts. And the pyramid does not support, the data does not support the goal of $1 million, because we know in the best practice, we need a certain number of gifts at certain levels to hit those numbers. So maybe you know how many donors at each level. Some of us are tracking long-time donors, right? So how long, do you know who your 10-year plus donors are? Those are amazing people. Those are golden. I see you nodding. I bet you've had some, Lara, you must have had some great conversations in your fundraising day with your longtime donors. Tell me about some of them. Can you think of any?
Yeah, I just remember, like, there was a time where I don't know if it was like a seminar or a webinar I'd been on, and somebody said, oh, you should really look at the monthly donors and see like the longevity of your monthly donors, and that will give you insight into who really truly supports your organization. And at the time I was working for a really large national nonprofit that had like a really strong alumni base, and there was a number of them where there would be these people that had been giving like $5 a month for maybe 20 years. And nobody knew who they were. Nobody knew anything about them. So one day I thought, hey, like this webinar told me that I should be understanding who these people are. So I picked up the phone and I ended up finding two, oh my gosh, two
Buying gifts?
bequests. Yeah. So the first woman I called, she said, oh, it's so lovely to hear from you. I've been giving to you for so long. Just wanted to let you know I have a massive gift for you in our will. And I was like, fantastic. So I just had a great fundraising day. And the other one was the same. And so it's like, if I hadn't have taken the time to actually look at who was in there and look at what might seem like a very, very simple or innocuous gift, that would have meant absolutely nothing to the organization or to me. So it's looking for those kinds of details.
That reminds me of data mining, right? So, we always want the shiny object that's somewhere else, right? We always want to find that brand new donor. And what you've just reminded me of is, fish in your own pond. To use Sam LaPrade, she has this wonderful phrase, fish in your own pond. Well, to fish in your own pond, you have to actually know your data, and you have to know who supports you strongly. And if you've been around for like 25 years or more, if you're listening to this webinar, you have deep ponds of fish. Sorry for the terminology of fish, but let's just go with it. They're there and they care about you. They show every month. And just on an aside on monthly donors, one of my like quasi pet peeves is that, I hear from them only transactionally every month because it comes back, thank you for your credit card donation, right? But I don't hear from them, some of them, I don't hear from them in a personal way, but just a reminder, if you have monthly donors, it's showing up on their credit card. You are a transaction to them until you connect, like Lara gave a beautiful example of. So, and then just on what are they usually capturing? I think most shops are capturing what their annual appeal made, right? So like they're tranching it maybe by revenue, right? So we made this much for events, we made this much for our July appeal, we made this much for December. What would be really cool, and I think what you can do with more data analytics is, okay, so what are the ways that this donor profile is self-selecting? Which are their natural touch points? How can we amplify that? What are the probabilities for next year? I know we had a quick talk about artificial intelligence, and it's coming, people. It's coming. It's going to change the world, right? I just think that we can start being a lot more. I mean, the biggest problem most of our shops have, let's be honest, is there's too much data, right? They don't know what they're looking for, and they don't understand how to use it for strategic decisions. That's really the main problem.
So from a metrics perspective, so if you're looking at how you've done year over year for, say, like the last 1 to 3 years, and you're looking to have like a typical, or you're looking to set goals and objectives for the next like 3 to 5 years, how do you recommend setting your metrics for the following year, particularly after a year like this?
Gosh, yeah. And so many of you out there are like, well, let's throw out that 2019 fundraising plan and write this from scratch. I think this is a great question. So if you know me, I'm a big believer in empowerment. So how are you going to show up for success? How are you going to report on your own metrics? I also believe that everybody should have the responsibility to choose how they present themselves. So I'm not saying that boards can't expect key performance indicators or want to have certain metrics. That's not my point. But I think it behooves us as a sector and a profession to make some conscious decisions about which metrics we track. So once you've decided that you own your data and you own your own success, Lara, right? It starts with choosing what you report on. Then I think you need to have some basics like revenue, net annual growth, which is like your total number of donors. That's always a great one. Now, with that, it's great to have new donors, but then the second part of that is, well, how many of the donors left you, right? How many chose somebody else? So it may look great on paper. This is where I think reporting and being strategic about how you report is really important. Sam LaPrade, I really want to give her credit here. She's another consultant that runs Griffin. She talks about second gift conversion. So they gave you a gift this year. What's your conversion rate to a second gift? And we know in the sector it's quite low. Like I think we're tracking at about, less than 45%, because I remember some research about how if a board member called, you could increase that second gift conversion up past 50%. So just a minute, that means like you have 2 people that give gifts this year. Next year, you're going to have less than 1 person that gives a gift. That's like, boy, that's a lot of work, people. That's like a big sieve that you're throwing people through. So my question around data is how can you plug up some of those holes, to go with the sieve analogy? So a couple more things to track. Attrition rate, right? That was what we were talking about. How many donors are leaving us? Average gift size. So this is interesting. Okay, in the chat, I want to go to the chat again. How many of you during the pandemic year, this is a yes or no question, saw a significant increase in your average gift size? If you're tracking it, I guess that's the question.
Anyone? Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think this is a trend.
So when people are really committed to an organization, they double down. I know I did that personally with a lot of my contributions as well.
Sadly, no.
Oh.
Yeah. Because I've found average gift size is a really great health indicator, data-wise, data point of happiness, like comfort and happy gifts. Happy gifts, is that a word? They like you, they want to keep supporting you. Okay, now the most important one, I think, right here, right now, if you know me, and you've worked with me, you have a fundraising plan. So you have a plan, you have revenue targets, and each year you report a return on investment number. So what that means is all the money you raised divided by all the costs that you incurred. And you can do it however you want. Like I encourage you to include staff. I encourage you to include your digital transformation costs in there as well. But the point of it is you now own your own benchmark against yourself. We're so hung up on looking at these sort of, go find the best benchmark for hospitals in the whatever. Well, they're not you. So the only way to really own your reporting is to find out what your ROI is for your shop, and then start tracking that year over year and make it part of your fundraising plan and make it part of your reporting to the board. Because you can hear my bias here. You have 9 people in my world that tend to be your chairs, your board chairs. They're passionate people. They're usually super smart business people. They rarely know a lot about the mechanics of fundraising. They're open and willing to learn. So what you show them in reporting, Lara, really matters, right? When you feed them data and information, A, feed it in a way they can understand. B, feed it in a way that shows year over year. Don't just give them a number. I had a client recently who showed the trend like this, right? So they had all these bequests. If you're listening audio only, I've got my finger up high and I'm like, I'm dropping it down. There's like this valley, and then, and their trend year over year was drop, drop, drop. That's total revenue. Well, it makes the team look really bad, right? But if you were to put in what they've been spending on fundraising, you would see it completely correlates, right? The less you spend on fundraising, the less you spend. They had a huge bequest program back in 2008, and that's what was churning all that stuff in there. But if you don't show that to them as board members, if you don't own your own reporting, you're also not going to be able to own your own successes. So I just mentioned a couple of those things, and I'm a big believer in, okay, call it a dashboard, call it whatever it is, but there's some sort of non-negotiables that you are tracking. Is it on your agenda for your team meetings? Is it showing up on your board agenda? Are we talking about this quarterly? So that's another question. How often do you report on these data points?
Mhm.
If you're a small shop, it might be really hard to report quarterly even, but at least every 6 months. I love when we set a target in January and then we get to November and we're like, oh yeah, what was that target? Yeah, like what was that? You know, you are so pooched by November. You've got a month to adapt. And remember, the bigger the shop, the more everybody's counting on that money. So to me, there's absolutely a quarterly touch point. And that probably involves finance as well in my world, at least in national shops or larger shops, just to make sure you're on track. And that means you can do some course corrects because stuff happens, pandemics happen, but it gives you the sovereignty to own your success, actually. So if last thing I would say, Lara, I just want to get this across, is return on investment. Actually do the exercise so that you can own it. And so when people challenge you on things or challenge you on strategic decisions, you can show the impact on the revenue side.
Nice. So, I mean, you touched on what metrics should you be tracking. So you were talking about revenue, net annual growth, second gift conversion, attrition, average gift size, ROI. But where and how you're capturing all this, and people can obviously be stuck in analysis paralysis over all this data. Like, how much of this data should be captured, and how long are you looking to take to produce reports around this stuff? Like, how much work do you put behind this?
Great question. Okay. Well, I just want to know what our audience thinks. How long? I'm sorry, I'm going to answer the question, but I just want to see what they say. How long, people on this call, does it take you to pull a report that's meaningful? Because my gut is some of you have got one-click reporting. Give me a time amount. Like, let's give you a range. Like, is it less than half an hour? Is it an hour? Oh, minutes. I love
Minutes,
it.
nice.
Marion, love it. I had once, while you guys are putting your stuff in the chat, I'll just tell about a story about a client, Lara. We had a junior person spending 3 days to prepare for an annual board meeting, or sorry, a monthly board meeting, to pull from all the different systems, the finance, the revenue, right, the endowment funds, and create these reports, right? And it was ludicrous when you looked at what the costs were, and to have that person on that file. So sometimes people don't think about it that way. Here's my gut is, it's twofold. One is, what do you need? I always start with the bare minimum. What do you have to have, right? Accept the fact, and I hate to say this because I'm a perfectionist, it might be slightly imperfect, right? I'm not saying you're going to get every single gift in, and Mrs. Smith's monthly donation that skews all our numbers, comes in on the 2nd of the month, and that's not going to get captured in July 1st or whatever. But even if you're tracking a ballpark, and then to me, it's about how are you using that data to influence the meeting, the next steps, and how does it tie back to the strategy? Because you kind of hook your sales to a couple of things, like this year we want to increase our monthly donor list from 5 to 50, whatever your numbers are. But if your actions aren't supporting that shift, who cares about the reporting? You're reporting on things that you haven't done. I just find that really circular thinking. And then, I think how you present them really matters. Can we remember that we live and breathe this like all day? At least most of you are like well steeped in Excel spreadsheets. Probably, that's probably a bad word for a data conversation, but we're living in Excel spreadsheets. That's the reality. If you send that out to a board member, or if you send that out to a CEO that you're trying to influence, it goes across 3 pages, Lara. You can't print the thing. Like, give them what they need in a succinct way. More information doesn't mean more comprehension. If anything, it dilutes. So trying to keep focused on key points. I also think you can use these for your touch points with your bosses or your performance meetings to really be succinct and track a couple of things. Now, I know that's hard. We all want to explain everything to everyone. And usually if you're on this call, you are a data geek, like you are passionate about this. I see some names in this chat that I know you love to get in there and manipulate things. And so the question to ask is, how long is it taking you? What are you learning from it? And how quickly can you course correct? And how are you using it to influence above you? Because the reality is that we still live in hierarchies. And if we want to achieve something, how can we use the data to influence them, right?
Great, thank you. I know, like, even just in our line of work and looking at the amount of time that people are doing to spend on the reporting, I feel like saying, come talk to Belmar for a few minutes and we can help you with that. I on a regular basis, we see projects where they will go from like a week to pull their quarterly reports down to less than an hour. So it's life-changing, it's mind-blowing, and there is a better way. That's the plug.
Yeah, well, and I want to pick up on that because you talked about too about funders. Funders are asking for more of this now. And so you were actually saying that you're seeing an uptake from the charities because the funders are pushing for it. So I'd love for you to just kind of quickly talk about that. I find that very fascinating. They want more to see more impact, Lara, is that it?
Yeah, I mean, like a big part of it is because the funders want to see the impact of their donations, right? And if a charity is not actually able to track the impact of the work that they're doing or the real impact of it because they're so disconnected between their different departments, if they can actually get the real numbers, in many cases, it's significantly higher than what they were actually reporting because they are reporting real numbers and actually getting realistic numbers. And so that's actually helping them find an increase in their funding. So, which is pretty cool, right? It's like found money. So it's really justifying a lot of the projects that we are able to support. And then funders are really happy because then they're able to say, look, like these investments that we've made have had fantastic returns.
Absolutely.
So we have just a few more minutes just on the interview, and then we're going to open up into questions. But I wanted to touch a little bit on change management because this is a really big piece for somebody in my role, because often when you're working with an organization that doesn't maybe have any systems in place and they aren't tracking any metrics, for the first time, somebody is coming in and saying, okay, now you're going to be held accountable. What are some of the ways in which you recommend or can suggest that leaders can account for this when they're bringing in new systems?
Yeah. So it's a great question. I wish I had this really cute, pithy answer, but it's multifaceted. I appreciate the question. So take a minute if you're listening to this and try and think about what kind of organization you're working in. Are we a nimble or are we more of the dinosaur type, right? Are we at a slow moving, thoughtful type? And I see some giggles over there. I see some people laughing on the webinar. That's great. I mean, trying to figure out who we are, because that's part of your milieu. And then I think part two is, who are the influencers? Where are the linchpins? And what do they care about, right? Fundraising is all about being a bridge. And I actually think change management is a little bit of that too. What are they going to get out of it from helping you change your systems and your reporting? Are they going to get less phone calls and less bugging from you? Are they going to get a tap on the back from their boss because they've put in this great system? You know, I think a needs assessment is always a great place to start. This is not my, not my daily bread, but this idea of like, what could be better at the organizational level is a great place to start. And I also believe in beware of the lines in the sand, Lara. Like the minute you say, well, a database system cannot cost more than X, or there's no way I'm giving up responsibility of Y, or there's no way anybody except Bob can have access rights to Y, right? The minute somebody says something like that in a meeting, you have a line in the sand, and then somebody has to lose face. So I think change management is really important in the sense of moving towards something. It will probably take longer than you think it will. You will absolutely need whoever your top dog, senior leadership or board buy-in to make it happen, because it is heavy lifting and it must be a priority. So working groups, I've certainly seen that. I think having representatives from each of the different parts of the organization is a great way to start. And I always start with blue sky, and I'm going to use my crawl, walk, run, right? At the blue sky, what's possible, and then what are the phases for it? Because also it's really scary for people who have used these systems for years and years and know how to do it, to give up ownership. We're talking about control, right? And I don't mean
Mhm.
that like, is that a little C or a big C? I think it's a big C. Like, who am I if I don't do that report? How do I contribute? So I think some of those things about working groups, creating a pilot program, maybe you can slice off one aspect of the data or one piece of the project, see how it goes, use the learning. There's a great book by Adkar, Adkar. I did a lot of work in my executive coaching programs on change management because it's absolutely important, whether it comes to HR or data or whatever. And I found there were some really great steps and really great advice in there. And making sure you're always hooking the change onto what somebody else wants, right? So if I'm talking to my kids, right, people? If I'm talking to my kids, I'm not going to tell them that they need to hang up their backpacks, right? Because they just won't. But if I'm talking to my kids and I said, if we all the backpacks were hung up, we could probably get takeout. Like, they're in. They're like, sign
Mhm.
me up, get past the backpack thing. So I'm curious your thoughts on change management too, Lara, because you've probably been through a lot of it. There's some that are people that love it and change, and some people that really viscerally object to it. Have you had that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally a Gemini, so bring it on. But I also find like, and very frequently, I often use the conversation with clients I'm working with is, okay, you have one person working whose sole job is to pull this one report once a month. Like, is that what they want their life to be? Like, quite honestly, is that what they want to be known for? Is that what they want to contribute? And I think if you understand what other people's motivation is or what other people might want to be passionate about, and really it's like freeing it up, and technology enables people to free up that human power for good, right? Like if you're working in a nonprofit, you probably want to be working with clients or working with prospects or donors or something. Like there just must be a better way to create that human connection. So that's really how I see it. So we're coming up to the end of our interview piece. I would love to open up the floor now for questions if there's any. Just put them in the chat. While we're waiting for that though, oh wait, we've got one. Okay. So how do you cultivate a culture of metrics within a team or an organization?
Yeah, great question. So I sort of feel like the subset of that question is a culture of accountability. I kind of feel like metrics is, in this case, might be a substitute. Um, there will be carnage. Let's just say that out loud, right? In my experience, people that don't embrace accountability are doing it because, for whatever reasons, they're fearful of that. So again, I think buy-in is really important. I think trying to figure out what metrics we want to track, starting with few and working to more, and also being realistic that stuff happens. I'm not here to say that there's nothing here about this around if there's a difference between a non-performing employee and a passive aggressive employee and a employee that really doesn't care, right? Those three have to be treated in very different ways. And often I find with the right supports and the right structure, you can actually convert a ho-hum employee into a really high performing employee. They just didn't understand what the goals were or what the metrics we're tracking were. So that's like my super short answer. I think seeking feedback is the other part. If we think that we could do better, let's ask about it and let's see if there's appetite to do better. Because if we're the only one that wants to do better or wants to track more, it will be a heavy lifting. What's that called? A steep climb.
Steep climb, yeah. And I know working in organizations myself, like because I've always been very goal oriented personally, and it was really interesting working in an environment where people didn't necessarily care about metrics. But what I would find is I would create actual metrics for myself and make sure everybody knew about them because I was blowing them out of the water. And that got other people really excited about just what was happening within fundraising. We had another comment here. Oh, this is great. Jenny shifted our metrics from financial to performative, and it made a huge difference in our team morale. This comes from Chelsea McIntyre, Jenny. I would love to hear a little bit about what she's talking about.
Sure, happy to. And so nice to see Chelsea on this call. So this was a couple of things, but it was around a major gifts file, and it was sort of, sometimes I call them major gifts people, they're like, here we go, here's another hill, let's jump the hill. Woohoo, we made it to the side of the hill. Okay, here's the next hill, let's go. It can be a very lonely experience, right? And especially when you're only tracking how much money you bring in. So the performative metrics that we brought in were things like, have we had a meaningful conversation with that donor? Have we had enough touch points? Is the donor feeling like in their conversations that they're being heard? Are they moving towards projects that they care about? So the idea of activities, I hate that word. I hate the word moves management even more, but not just tracking financial. And one more feedback about that, we talked about pre-metrics. I don't know what the word is. Pre-metrics and metrics. You may be tracking dollars, but the pre-metric or the indicator is how many donors have you spoken to. That also ties into how many donors are in your portfolio, right? Like, how can you reach 220 major gift prospects in a year? People, there's 365 days, and that's if you touched one of them every day. It would almost take up every day, and that doesn't include weekends. So, I think that those points are really important. Making sure you know the size of your portfolio, that is a data point. There's no way you can manage 220 contacts. I'm a big believer in 5, right? So I think all of these things are about, what are the things, there's a great book called The One Thing. What's the one thing that I need to keep doing every week that will result in the metrics that I need to have happen? That's a fantastic strategic question. I love that question.
And I actually really like the comment that Chelsea made, just in that even if you aren't meeting the financial goals, there's still other goals in there that you can track towards that can still keep you on track and feel positive about the work that you're doing. Another one in here, for organizations who are looking at tracking metrics for the first time, what are some tips that you have, and how can leaders prepare their staff for these changes?
Whew. Yeah, great question. So where's it coming from? I think knowing who wants to track metrics, I think we say, let's track metrics. And there are some people whose shackles just go up, to be honest, because they're already defensive. They're saying, well, why do you want to know? And what is it about my performance that you're not happy with? It's a little bit like executive coaching. People used to think, some people still think executive coaching is for underperforming people. And that makes me laugh, actually, because most of the folks I work with are overachievers / keeners. So metrics is kind of the same thing, right? We think of metrics as clamping down, maybe, but I would invite you to think of it as up leveling. And so touch points and looking at starting to track metrics. Can it come from senior leadership? I think it has to. I think it's hard to do it from below or from those entry-level positions. I think it's a lot harder. I think that there has to be an appetite for the organization to do it. And I think you probably need to know why, Lara. Is it just because the boss wants to know what you're doing every day? Or is it because it's going to influence your success, your metrics, your dollars in the door? Often we're tracking pipeline, right? Many of you are probably building pipelines for gifts. So maybe you want to track new cultivation meetings, or we used to call them qualification meetings, that idea of the first time you meet someone. Wow, think about how your world would change if you were just focusing on qualification. How many brand new people did you meet this month? That would be completely different than how many touch points did you have this month? Great question.
Thank you. And we've got another one, and then we're going to have to wrap it up. So some organizations use infographics to present metrics. Can you please recommend other fun tools that can be used to present them?
I think you would do this better on this question than me, Lara, because I'm like, I think I know how to do it on Excel, but
yeah,
maybe
that's me.
Other smart people on the call could put some stuff into the chat. I think those are fantastic questions, and I love visuals. Just to comment, that really, really helps explain things quickly, and we're a visual. I'm a visual species, so I just love stuff like that. Please share. Actually, I'd love to hear from the group.
Yeah, if there's any suggestions that people have used to present their metrics, whether it's to board or to donors, would love to hear that in the chat. And while we are doing that, I have some winners to announce. Oh, that was bad. I would like to announce that we have our 2 winners for today's raffle prize are Griffin Thomas and Chelsea McIntyre.
Woohoo!
Yay! So thank you, both of you, for joining us today, and we will be in touch with you about your prizes. So just to wrap up, first of all, thank you so much, Jenny, and thank you everyone who came today to join us. Our next webinar is going to be in July, and so far it's slated to be on AI and fundraising. So stay tuned for some additional details. And congratulations, Griffin. I guess you can say that you've now won something. So happy you could do that today. Just in wrapping up, this recording will be available on our YouTube channel, and we're also going to be sending out an email with a link to this, as well as to Jenny's socials. But I also just wanted to say a special thank you, Jenny, for your insight today. In closing, I am a big fan of the Tim Ferriss Show, and I absolutely always love his wrap-up question that asks, if you could put up a billboard with one message, what would that billboard say? So I'm going to put that to you, Jenny. If you could install a billboard that fundraisers everywhere would see, what would that say?
No pressure.
No.
Here's one. Today is a great day. So today is a great day to start something. Like, why put off till tomorrow what you can do today?
Beautiful. Well, thank you. I like that sentiment. It makes me feel like I need to live in the moment and just do things and be positive and maintain that flow. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you all for the participation. We really enjoyed this time together. And thank you, Jenny. Have a great day.
Pleasure.
Bye-bye.